So why tech talks, right? So what do we got here? So curiosity, basic technical literacy, confidence actually stole this from Doug, self-reliance, but I added my own piece of this, and also hacking the planet. Kidding, not really. So, so this is broken up into two sections. The first section is why information security is so hot right now, honestly. Like a brief history, why it got to this point, why we're here. And then the second section is how to protect your individual privacy online. So of course, got some memes in there. Cybersecurity is so hot right now because it is. If you're looking for a career change, if you're looking to get into technology, cybersecurity is without question the way to do it. It doesn't matter if you have a degree or not. It really doesn't matter. A lot of these people don't. Differentiation real quick, just a high level, black hat, gray hat, white hat. Black hat hacker, essentially you're doing some malicious things. You're trying to get money, you're trying to, whatever, buy and sell drugs online, etc. Gray hat, it's kind of the in between. You're attacking, you're defending, you're doing this combination of things. You're exposing information, you're exposing security flaws that companies have as well. And then there's white hat. You're basically just, you're essentially a security research hired by a company to identify these vulnerabilities. So, let's briefly dive into the history. Essentially, like what this is a flaw in the design. So this is super high level, kind of picturesque view of what the internet is, the interwebs. And then a flaw in the design. So we didn't focus on how you could wreck the system intentionally. And this was said by one of, quite literally one of the inventors of the internet. So the idea behind the internet, wasn't really, the thought process of security wasn't really considered. It just was one of those things that wasn't necessarily thought of when, you're designing this. You didn't think of, you're building out the internet and you're like, oh, essentially we're going to, nation states would begin attacking each other. Critical infrastructure would be a part of this, nuclear systems and all these systems. So one of the things that just was not thought about. The source here, it's a really good article. I posted this in the resources as well. You can dive into this and really dig into it, but it's a net of insecurity. It's actually probably one of the best pieces I've read on, just the overall history of the internet. And then some further reading on this, on the history of the internet. This is a really good book, Where Wizards Stay Up Late. So this is the origins of the internet itself. It's a really good read. Why does all this matter? So you use the internet on a daily basis. You rely on it. Everyone does. It's gotten to the point where, quite literally software has eaten the world. You can't escape it. It's that simple. You carry a tracking device. Yes, your phone. It's tracking you. It's easy as that. It's, you no longer, this is no longer a tinfoil hat, conspiracy. You're being tracked every day. Advertisers are tracking your internet usage. You might go to whatever, you might go to a site. Let's say, for example, you go to I don't know, Daily Juice or something like that. And then you go to another site and you see a Daily Juice ad. Okay, so you have targeted ads based on history. You might go to Pedal, you might see this. So it's just one of those realities. And then, of course, understanding who has access to your data and why. How can this impact you? In the future, will you be approved for a loan based on your social media content? Are you posting things? Are you posting things that you purchased? Are companies looking at this? This is all reality. These are things that are happening. Of course, there's this argument, you're online and it's like, oh, okay, I've got nothing to hide. So there's this nothing to hide argument. Doesn't necessarily matter. There's laws and policy shifts. You could say, one thing one day, you could, disregard a certain political system or whoever it might be. And then there's a shift in policy. And now you're a dissident running away and trying to hide. So that's one of the realities. And of course, there's the other thing as well, at a lot of conferences that I've gone to. So InfoSec Southwest is a good example of this. Basically there's somebody there. It's like, okay, you've got nothing to hide. Okay, give me your phone. Give me your Facebook access. Let me read through your messages. Give me all of that knowledge. Probably not. I would assume no. And of course, on that, there's also the legend of the surveillance cameraman. So there's this gentleman who would go around and film people, obviously without their consent. And it was a strange thing for a lot of people, but he was making a point. He was making a point when you walk in somewhere, you're being filmed. Like, it's just one of those things. He's trying to make it apparent that, you're essentially constantly under surveillance. Look at the UK right now. Look at London as well. So you're constantly being monitored. So CCTV and all these things. So the internet is serious business. Real serious business. This is from a Scientology protest. This is back in the heyday. Internet serious business as well. So really we have, a bunch of things you might be familiar with here. This is really what I'm getting at is like, there's history before this. There's, John Draper and Captain Crunch and, Wozniak, of course, and a lot of people who were hackers. But I'm focusing on what I lived through, in my life. So some of which is, we have Gene Kahn here, who talked about, Nutella and creating P2P networks and being able to share information, a little more serious. Now you're sharing information that's copyrighted, so the government's kind of taking note of this and they're realizing like, oh, people can actually do some damage with this. Kim.com, of course, really, really famous, Mega Upload and all these sites. You're essentially having sites to upload copyrighted content, millions and millions of dollars are being lost. Pirates Bay down here. So that's a really, really interesting one. LimeWire, you're all familiar with LimeWire. Napster, of course. But all of this, from Nutella. So it's rather interesting stuff. Aaron Schwartz over here, just essentially like information itself, taking it from universities and, getting in deep trouble about it. So things are getting a little more serious. And then we skip forward a bit. So we have Tom Green over here. It used to be fun. People online would get together and prank his show and make him do silly things. He used to have an online show. So this is a little bit later after his MTV show. You have, things are getting a little more serious now. A collective of people kind of gathering and having some fun. And then you have Barrett Brown here. Barrett Brown was involved with Project Genealogy. Some interesting stuff there. Protesting Scientology. Getting a little more serious. People are kind of collecting into, attacking certain political factions and all these things. Skip forward a little bit further, you have the weaponized web. So, things were a little silly. People were going out in public and protesting Scientology and all these types of things. So the scale of cybersecurity is kind of shifting. Things are becoming more and more serious. Now you have LulzSec and you have Anonymous to some degree who, did some more serious things. You had the Arab Spring uprisings and all of these events. You have Lizard Squad, which was also rather interesting. You the PlayStation hacks and, doxes and all the information leaks. Once again, this is millions of dollars. And this is only a couple of people. So that was kind of interesting. Over here, you have the Jester. It's actually a very famous Polish painting, but the Jester kind of took that over. He's more of a political hacker, exposing information. Yeah. And then you have the weaponized web again. So individual and distributed. So you have some more interesting things here. Of course, you have the Arab Spring uprisings, you have Egypt, Tunisia, you have some of the Occupy protests, which is interesting. WikiLeaks, of course. And then here you have, and this is in the 90s. So this is actually like, before, I was really online, but you have Loft, and then you have Loft essentially saying and gathering before, the Congressional Senate and saying like, hey, there's a couple of key points, of the backbone of the internet that we can actually take out. So, via TCP/IP, so these protocols of the internet. And the interesting thing here was Mudge. Mudge is just unbelievable. So yeah, this is the Call of the Dead Cow, Loft. You might know somebody from Call of the Dead Cow, Beto. Is running for, is a politician. So it's some interesting facts there. Weaponized web continued. So you have things getting a little more serious. You have the Silk Road, Austin, Texas. He was from Austin, Texas. So Ross Ulbricht. You have basically drug sales, billions of dollars of drug sales. You have like these drug cartels, and then you have like, these online transactions for billions of dollars. It's kind of interesting. And this was all online, and they couldn't find this person for ages. And it was like, it's like one guy. I mean, a network of individuals, of course, but like, one individual doing this. Things taking a more serious turn as well. You have 3D printing. You have, you have in the 80s and the 90s, you had this issue of cryptography where, you couldn't, and it's still a law, there's these ridiculous laws where like, essentially you can't transfer math over state lines because now it's an issue. Now it's a criminal, you can be prosecuted for this stuff. But now you can print weapons through the internet. Things are a little more serious. Now the government's starting to take note of this, and they're like, oh, what's going on here? People are hacking. People are distributing drugs online. People are printing weapons online. Okay, things are kind of serious now. So getting up to the point, things are even more serious. So you have the weaponized web continued. And now you have nation-state sponsored attacks. So, you have, this is really crazy stuff, but I mean, essentially you have this concept of an air-gapped network. So you have the internet, and then you have like this critical infrastructure. So you have, you have systems like lighting systems and electrical grids. And I don't know if any of you remember, but in like the 2000s, there was an outage, electrical outage across the East Coast. Really questionable. They're still wondering if it was a cyber attack. But this concept of air-gapped networks, a lot of nuclear plants, and more critical infrastructure, they'll air-gap their network. Essentially what that means is they'll have their own internal network, and nobody from the outside can access this without actually being inside of the internet or inside of that network itself. So what's interesting is like, without question, this was a nation-state sponsored attack where you had certain governments involved with Iran. A lot of governments specifically were not happy with certain nations gaining nuclear technologies. So you had, essentially a really unbelievably powerful virus that no individual could have written themselves, not even collective individuals. Collective individuals have done some amazing things, but this just was an impossibility. So you had a nation state working together with something called Stuxnet. And Stuxnet basically was a virus that would take, in nuclear power plants, you had centrifuges. These centrifuges would essentially, they would spin at super, super, super high speeds and create a level of radiation that would essentially it would either power something or it would turn into a weapon. You could weaponize it. So there are a couple different ways that you could do this. So this nuclear power plant, what ended up happening is that they infiltrated this air-gapped network and installed this virus in this air-gapped network, which I find to be fascinating. And those centrifuges spun to the point where they actually exploded. So really, really interesting stuff there. So there's, this is some obvious stuff. And then, so Great Firewall of China, of course, blocking Google, blocking, YouTube, Facebook, Gmail, et cetera. This more of the censorship side. So there's attacks, and then there's this issue of censorship and how information wants to be free. And of course, there's other, nation-state sponsored attacks with ourselves, with China, with Russia, with, this is a map of, some electrical facilities of, you have Ukraine here, and then Ukraine was attacked. So there was like massive critical infrastructure attacks where you had, thousands, millions of people without power. And, it becomes a big deal, when you have no water and electricity. It's like to us, it's like such a thing where it's like, it's so common. It's like, oh, let me, here's some water, here's electricity, great. But when you're out of like electricity and water for like days and weeks, it's a problem. It's like how you can control states and nations. Economically, you can, restrict and constrain nations pretty easily, right? Like if you're a superpower, you can do that. Electronically, you can do that as well. You just all you have to do is target their infrastructure. So that's a big deal. I don't know. This is the thought process you have to take sometimes. And then weaponized web. So with all of this, all of what I just went over, there's an obvious need to change to the response of information security. So the US in multiple countries created departments. So like we've had some departments for a while. We had the NSA. We had like some defense contractors like Booz Allen Hamilton, a couple other contractors, et cetera. HB Gary, and then you had actual departments like United States Cyber Command. It's actually a joke because this is I put on my Rogue and Wizard hat, but it's kind of a meme. There's also 8200 over here, so it's an Israeli intelligence group, also involved with Stuxnet supposedly. And then you have this idea of red teams and blue teams. If you're interested in getting into security, I don't know, maybe you can be a hybrid of both. Maybe you're interested in one thing. Maybe you're interested in attacking. Maybe you're interested in defending. I don't know. But what ends up happening here is, how you have ethical hacking, you're exploiting vulnerabilities in software. So you have, essentially a layer of, software itself. You can attack via the internet. You can attack via an application. Lots of different things. It's just almost as simple as like, brute forcing a login. Like say, for example, you have a password, you go to it, you navigate to a site. If they don't have two-factor authentication, if they don't have, if they don't lock you out of passwords, I could easily write a script. And basically that script says like, hey, here's a dictionary of passwords. Let me run this against this particular site. And more than likely I'll probably get in. That's just a way of doing penetration tests and exploiting vulnerabilities. Black box testing, social engineering, web app scanning. A lot of attacks that you read about in the news are more than likely social engineering related. It's fascinating. Kevin Mitnick is a really good example of that. In social engineering, it's as simple as me calling up. Honestly, it's me. All right. So let's say, for example, I Google your name, right? So I Google your name. I find a little bit of information about you. I know your work. I know, a little bit of information about your family and all that. So now I realize you have AT&T or something like that. You call up AT&T, you use this information, and then you use that information to reset somebody's password or whatever it might be. And then potentially you can get access. And that's one way to do it. And that's through social engineering. And of course, on the blue team side, it's more of the defensive security side. So it's some of the stuff that I do here, with some of the projects that we're working on right now. These are some of the things that I'm thinking of. So infrastructure protection, it's a big deal. If you have your infrastructure exposed, if you have ports open, it's a problem. It's a problem. Like some of the things we had in the past that we discovered, you can have a port open, you can, essentially DDoS this, which just means you're pinging this endpoint, and you can take down the site depending on how your infrastructure set up as well. It's not scalable as well. So damage control, incident responses, operational security, threat hunters, digital forensics, bug bounties. A lot of companies are doing bug bounties, but in reality, a bug bounty, what does that mean? It means you go to Facebook to pay 20 grand for a single vulnerability. It just, depends on what you find. It depends on that, how extreme the vulnerability is. There's been some really nasty ones lately, and it just keeps happening. Some of the stuff I'm working on now, like Kubernetes specifically, they keep finding vulnerabilities, but it's good because, it's better to find them than have a zero-day exploit. A zero-day exploit essentially means you have a vulnerability, you know how to get into a system. Facebook, for example, to go, and there's a lot of good data there. There's some, inboxing and all this kinds of stuff. A lot of juicy data. So if you have a 0 day and you know how to get into somebody's account, you can probably sell that for millions of dollars easily. People have done this. There's a couple good sites you can do that on. If you want to check some of those out, Exploit Hub is a good one. So if you have a 0 day attack, sell it expose it depending on what you want to do with it, but you can go to Exploit Hub and do that. But yeah, so some further reading. Further reading on some of this stuff. If you're interested in the history of this, Loft, CDC, Cult of the Dead Cow. Actually, that's where Beto was exposed, by the way, was this book that I read. It was a fantastic book, Cult of the Dead Cow, and how the original hacking supergroup might save the world. It's really neat stuff. LulzSec, etc. One of the best documentaries I've probably ever watched is 0 Days. So this is about Stuxnet specifically. This is about, those state-sponsored attacks. There's all the, all the fun stuff. There's all the, corporate attacks and all these types of things. But then there's like, Stuxnet, which goes into the details of like, why governments, why they take this stuff seriously, and why they created these massive departments, and why, cybersecurity shifted up basically to the point of, nuclear weapons attacks in terms of scale, like, why this is important, how you can use this as an attack. It's quite literally a weapon these days. And now, that's why it's become such a point to defend yourself. You have a lot of governments and corporations and individuals who are snooping, who are using this information against you. So that's a big deal. Making yourself invisible online. This is what we're getting to. There's a couple of different ways to do this. Not all of it's perfect. That's something to keep in mind. A lot of this stuff has been around for a very, very long time. The first thing I want to point out is if you go incognito, you're essentially not doing anything. If I'm on the same network as you, I'm going to run Wireshark. I'm going to look at your data. I'm going to find out what you're looking at. So that's just something to keep in mind. Your administrator, they're going to see that data. It depends, if it's encrypted or not, if you're using HTTPS, et cetera. But it's one of the realities. So something to keep in mind. PGP, it's been around for a long time. You might have heard of Edward Snowden. If you're for or against that, whatever. But they utilize PGP, pretty good privacy, to communicate securely through emails. It worked for a while. There were a few mess ups there. I'll discuss that. Tails, it's a remote operating system. I don't know. Back in the day, I used something called Knoppix. If you're like on a school network, like in high school, whatever, 2007, my high school days, you'd use Knoppix to get past the Know About Systems network. And it's like, oh, okay. So you have a flash drive or whatever you want to use, you run this OS. But Tails is a little bit more sophisticated because you're actually running Tor now. So like your communications are encrypted, which is fascinating. You're much more secure. And when you unplug it, it runs like this buffer overflow where it basically just encrypts that data and just destroys the data essentially. So like anybody trying to look at that, they're not going to be able to see anything. There's freenet. There's a VPN, of course, which is in itself questionable. I mean, there's free VPNs that you can use. There's paid VPNs that you can use. There's free proxies that you can use. And essentially all that means is just, you're connecting to, securely and remotely connecting to a server that's, protecting what you look at, essentially. And like, the issue there is, of course, like, that VPN provider, to be honest, like a massive government agency is going to come in and say like, hey, we have information that this IP connected to this VPN. We're going to have to, court order you to do this. And oftentimes, like if I'm the company who owns that VPN, yeah, it's like, whoa, I don't want to mess with that because they're throwing me in jail for the rest of my life. So that's something to keep in mind. Then there's Tor. Tor is interesting because it actually started off as a government project. It's actually started in the US Navy research labs back in the 90s. And Tor utilizes some really clever math, super clever math. There's actually a couple mathematicians in this project, but it ended up becoming open source. And now it's, there's an organization around it that you can use to connect to sites securely, privately. And then I'll go a little bit deeper into Tor. We're going to focus on Tor here. There's also Burner. I mean, if you're afraid of, really like, so a couple things with if you're afraid of somebody, having your phone number, say for example, you're selling something on Craigslist or something like that, and you're basically just like, oh, I don't want them to have my phone number. Sure, you can use Skype. You can use something like that. By the way, Skype's not secure. Skype's tracking your data and they're selling your data. And the government had court orders and they pulled that data, your conversations, everything else, and they exposed all that. So back in the day, there was something called X keystroke, and it's all became public. But with Burner, it's interesting because you can utilize your existing phone, and then you can just create fake numbers, and you can just use it, to communicate, with somebody that you're selling something with, or whatever you're doing. It's not the perfect solution. I mean, there's other ways to do that. We can get into that. But yeah, so we're going to focus on Tor here. A little more information on the internet. I mean, there's the surface web, which is, the sites, a lot of sites you access on a daily basis, like Google, Wikipedia, Bing, all these types of things. And then there's the deep web. The deep web is like, maybe you're in university or high school or something, and they said like, hey, access this site, utilizing this password, or like maybe you had to remotely connect to a database or something like that. And what that means is like, you have a lot of academic information here, government resources, scientific reports, legal documents, stuff like that. That's a lot of the web. It's supposedly 90% of the web. I don't know how accurate these numbers are. And then of course you have the dark web here. So drug trafficking, political protests, legal information, Tor encrypted sites. Not all bad. I want to stress that. Not everyone using Tor is bad. Let's be honest here. You have people in countries that don't have access to information who are using this stuff. So making yourself invisible continued with Tor. What does Tor do? It anonymizes your online activity by encasing your traffic in encryption, and then sending this through multiple nodes. Nodes meaning like a server. You think of it as like a server that peel back those layers, hence the name, the onion router Tor, one at a time. Each node decrypts just enough information from the packet so the nodes don't know your identity or the website you're trying to connect to. It's not perfect, but it works. And then, essentially here you have an exit node. The last node that your data travels through is not encrypted. So there's a little ways to circumvent this, to go around it. You could use a VPN to connect to this, but then again, it's like, hey, if that VPN's court ordered, it's like, I don't know, you might be in trouble. The other thing as well is like, if you're connecting to Tor, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a second, and how, really briefly at a high level how to use it. Don't send personal information on Tor. Don't sign on Tor and then like navigate to Facebook or something and then log in on like your personal account, or like log in on like on your Gmail, because please don't do that. Getting started with Tor. The easiest way to get started with Tor, Mozilla, Firefox, you've heard of them. Great organization. I volunteered with them. they teamed up with the Tor project, and they basically created a browser that's super secure, allows you to easily access Tor, whether it's through your phone or whether it's just, you know, on your desktop, whatever it might be. And they utilize, you know, secure search and DuckDuckGo, all these types of things. And they prevent certain scripts from running against your browser because, you know, really, like, and Tor does this as well. Like, you can choose the level of security too. So you can say, like, hey, this is the safest level of security. Like, you know, I want to ensure, like, I'm not getting tracked, whether it's through cookies, whether it's through a script that, you know, identifies your MAC address, your IP address, all these types of things. So yeah, if you're interested in this, if you want to truly anonymize yourself, you know, and navigate the web on a safe level, or if, you know, you have friends that want to do these types of things, this is how you do it. So you just go to torproject.org, download the browser, start surfing, start checking it out, keep it legal. But keep in mind that Tor is not perfect. You know, this is a big deal. This is a lot of things some people have forgotten. There's a really, really good talk. It's by Adrian Crenshaw. And it was at DEF CON. I think it was like DEF CON 2016, 2015. But it pretty much talked about, you know, how people were utilizing Tor specifically. You know, I want to mention Ross Ulbricht here because this guy, you know, it's like I said, it's like at the level of like El Chapo. Like, you know, these are billion-dollar transactions on the internet. You know, so Ross Ulbricht basically he was the Dread Pirate Roberts, and he had the Silk Road and was utilizing Tor to connect to the site. And, you know, the problem was, like, just thinking back, there were a couple of things like that got this individual caught. One of which was like just utilizing your real email, like going on Tor and, like, you know, starting it off, right? You're starting off this project and you want to, you know, do something, whatever. You're doing something online. And then you post your email, and it's like, you know, if this investigative individual, like, they'll start searching these and start connecting the pieces. And then they ended up using that. And then they ended up finding an exit node that he didn't disconnect from securely. And they were able to identify him that way. And then they were able to get a court order to start monitoring his internet, realizing he was, you know, consistently connecting to the Tor. He wasn't protecting that connection. And then they caught him, and now he's serving double life. Another person, Sabu was from LulzSec and was doing some, you know, whatever, like at the time it was like funsy stuff where you're just basically just like finding vulnerabilities in various corporations and just dropping the information on it, you know, publicly, exposing it via Twitter, via whatever. He was caught because same situation. Like, he was just not securely connecting to Tor, and he was just utilizing it and he was getting too confident, too comfortable with what he was doing. Not that great. So what ended up happening, he ended up working with the FBI and exposing other individuals. A couple people, Jeremy Hammond and all of these people. But it's not perfect. Just something to keep in mind. So that's how you connect to Tor. This is how you're caught. But not all of it is bad. Once again, I just want to stress that. Further reading on making yourself invisible online, and I want to dive a little bit into this. It's a really good book. Kevin Mitnick, he's like kind of like a controversial figure. He was involved with some crazy stuff in the 90s, and he was like the first like really famous like hacker that was caught. Once again, a lot of his work was in social engineering. Like, he was incredibly technical and understood the internet at a deep level, down to DNS, you know, down to like, you know, all these super backbone of the internet type situations. But he used a lot of social engineering to get the information, the data that he needed. And ultimately, like, he was just curious. He was a curious individual. Like, that's just one of his passions. And, like, you know, everything that you're doing, you know, anonymously, it's not bad. Like I said, it's just sometimes you're curious to find, you know, vulnerabilities and all of these types of things. But he wrote a lot of books, and there's a really, really good one. The Art of Deception is a fantastic one. It talks about more of the social engineering side, but I want to focus on the Art of Invisibility because it talked about like a lot of what I just talked about, minus like the history. Because I give you like more of the history of like kind of like the late 90s, like, you know, the 2000s frame, because that's, you know, that's what I'm familiar with. That's what I lived, you know, that's you know, that's it. But I like this book because it really talks about like, hey, if you're going to use Tor, if you're going to use, you know, a burner phone, like, you know, you want to get down to the reality of like, you know, maybe you want to pay somebody to go buy the phone. Maybe someone's watching you buy the phone. You know, maybe you want to utilize some laundered cryptocurrency. to purchase these, to purchase your VPN or whatever it might be. So you're not trackable. They can't say like, hey, this individual uses VPN and then connect to Tor and do these things. And then maybe you're truly invisible. So this book will teach you how to be truly invisible. Once again, not perfect. You have a phone, they can still triangulate the data. Some people are still running Stingray and all these types of things that can collect data if you're within a local, if you're at a protest, for example, like, a lot of agencies can run something called Stingray and collect that data from your phone. So, and then it's like identifying that you were there. So another heads up. So that's how you make yourself invisible. And this is a really good book on how to get deep into it and really truly understand like all the bits and bytes of it. Because this is, once again, a high level talk. This is going a little bit further. This is just kind of protecting yourself online as well. I mean, I know a lot of people just want to, give the world their information and just like, hey, here's what I do. This is me. Yeah, I mean, this is it. Like, there's something called OSINT now. I love like the names they give these things, right? This is basically just Googling somebody. Like, I mean, there's some tooling out there that makes it much, much easier to do nowadays. Because, I mean, this is information. This is data. People pay for this data. Like a big thing, a big exposure from the Snowden days and all that, and Booz Allen Hamilton and the NSA and all these companies that were doing this. A lot of what they were doing was just collecting metadata, and associating that metadata to potential threats. And like, you were somehow pulled, and your uncle was pulled into this, and without your consent, which kind of sucks. But like I said, it just depends on your viewpoint and all that stuff. But this is an easy way to do this. So open source intelligence basically just means like, it's information about you that's available, and we're essentially scraping it. Google yourself. What do you see? If you Google yourself, go through all of it, check it out. Is it bad? Is it good? What do you got there? Be careful what you post online. Like, I'm dead serious when I say this. There's something called the Streisand effect. If you don't want something online, don't post it. If you post something bad, like, there's obviously people have been let go for, posting some ridiculous nonsense on Twitter, Facebook, etc. Like, even if you have like a lockdown private account, it's going to get there. People take a screenshot of this. The Streisand effect just refers to like, if something's online, Barbara Streisand, we all know Barbara Streisand, right? So Barbara Streisand had like this house, like she had like this super nice house, and somebody took a photo of it, and it was like online in like 2003, and she's like, hey, take it down. The internet didn't like that very much. So they took this photo and duplicated it and just made it heavily available everywhere possible. Just kind of as like a rebuttal to like, what she was saying and all the cease and desist orders and all that. It's like one of the things. I don't know. It's interesting. And then, of course, utilizing that data, this open source intelligence data, what is it used for? Could be used for social engineering. As I mentioned earlier, you could use that data on somebody to unlock something about them, which isn't ideal. Or the laws and policy can change. Like I said before, like if you're, online talking about a specific government or your own government, whatever it might be, things don't, things don't last forever. Things change. It's one of the other realities of life. And maybe your law could change. Maybe you're now a political dissident running away because you said something bad. So yeah, identifying information for phone numbers. There's tools out there that if you have a phone number, you can search this phone number, like a mobile line or something like that, and it will pull all of the sites that have that number and gather all that information on you as well. So that's just an example of one of the tools here. And that's free, if you know how to use this stuff. And there's lots of tutorials how to use this stuff on YouTube and everywhere else. Although I will say YouTube's starting to ban this stuff. So something to keep in mind. I guess YouTube has to make money or something. So information ultimately wants to be free, but protect yourself.